Afternoon, this is T. Clarkson. I work with Atoka Conservation Exchange. We help landowners throughout Virginia with conservation easement projects, specifically focused on the, that's where I'll start over again there if we can. Keep it a little short. This is T. Clarkson with Atoka Conservation Exchange. We work with landowners throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia on conservation easement projects. I'm also on the board of Enrichmond Foundation. And today I have Brett Glymph from Virginia Outdoors Foundation and Parker Agelasto from Capital Region Land Conservancy. Brett, if you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure, thank you, T. I'm Brett Glymph with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. The Virginia Outdoors Foundation is an independent public agency whose job it is to work with citizens and communities in furtherance of their open space goals and objectives. We are chartered by a section of code in the Code of Virginia, and we have been working with citizens and communities since 1966, and in partnership with them have conserved over 800,000 acres. So we are a public agency, as I said earlier, and have a statewide mission, and we work in partnership also with the many private land trusts around the state to perfect this public-private partnership in furtherance of our collective land conservation mission. So that's us in a nutshell.
Great, thanks. Parker?
So thank you, T, and hi, Brett. So I'm Parker Agelasto with the Capital Region Land Conservancy, and we are a local nonprofit land trust that was founded 15 years ago, largely to fill a void in the Richmond region, where there was not a land trust that was out being able to educate landowners to work very hand in glove with the legislature, with the planning departments to identify places that should be protected in our region. And that was our role initially. We expanded to become an easement holder. We currently hold about 20 conservation easements on over 2,200 acres, but we facilitated over 12,000 acres of protection within the capital region. Our service area is limited. We're not statewide. We cover the city of Richmond, Henrico, Chesterfield, Hanover, Goochland, Powhatan, New Kent, and Charles City. And as I said, we are a 501c3 organization, which is primarily funded through charitable gifts. And we are organized under a board of directors that includes 14 members and an advisory board of an additional 14 members.
Great, thanks guys. Let's start off, Brett, if you could just tell the audience what a conservation easement is for those that might not know.
A conservation easement is a voluntary transfer of development rights and restrictions on certain uses and activities that a landowner makes with respect to his or her land. In law school, they teach you that real property can be represented as a bundle of sticks. And in the case of a conservation easements, let's say real property ownership is represented by 10 sticks. 4 or 5 of those are transferred to a land trust to hold in trust, and those sticks represent the development rights, the right to subdivide, the right to use the property for certain commercial and industrial uses, and also it includes a promise that the landowner makes to manage the property consistent with an overall conservation purpose. So there are certain conservation best management practices that are included in a conservation easement. And that all goes towards not just reducing or extinguishing the development rights, but also making sure that the residue of the property, the bundle that is reserved to the landowner, that is in fact cared for in a manner that's consistent with the charitable objective of the conservation easement. So essentially, it's a voluntary agreement where a landowner or a land trust agree that certain development rights and restrictions of uses are placed on the property in order to preserve the natural resource of that particular property.
Great, thank you. And Parker, I'll ask you the next question. Why would a landowner be interested in donating a conservation easement and giving up some of these bundle of rights, as Brett mentioned?
Sure. So I can simply say from a personal standpoint, my parents donated a conservation easement to the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, and it was largely a planning process for the family. It was something that we collectively decided was good for our property. And oftentimes this is what a landowner goes through is, this is their property. How do they want that property to be treated? And in future generations, when they're no longer here, is there a certain type of treatment that they wish to see carried forward by either their inheritors, or whether it be sold and it's a new future landowner? And so most of the times it is land planning, and in many ways that landowner is being incentivized not just from an altruistic direction, meaning that this is something that they feel is important not only for their property but also for their community, but they can also be incentivized for other purposes that include financial incentives, whether they be Virginia state land preservation tax credits, whether they be federal charitable deductions. And then there are also other ways that can help when it comes to estate taxes or other benefits. Oftentimes a property under easement is perhaps more eligible for restoration projects as well.
Great, thank you. And I'll ask sort of a follow-up. There's a common misconception when you donate a conservation easement, does that automatically mean you are going to allow public access on your property?
No, in fact, it does not require public access. Some grants that might pay a landowner for an easement would require public access, but just the general donation of a conservation easement, the donation of those rights that Brett outlined, typically do not require public access. In fact, the landowner retains ownership of their land. They, other than what is included in the easement, they can transfer their land, they can sell their land, as long as it meets the standards that are upheld within the
And Brett, what is the role of the land trust in the conservation easement process?
Well, we are ultimately the holder of those several sticks that I mentioned earlier in the bundle. And certainly easements do not require per se public access. There are some easements where that is the principal objective. But in most cases, I would say probably 90% of the cases, as Parker mentioned, it's not. However, the easement does protect public values in private land. So, and that's why the Virginia Outdoors Foundation is there. It's there to be the custodian of those conservation easements, which represent the protection of those public values. So land conservation, water quality, scenic viewshed protection, historic place, historic resource protection. So those are identified public values that are being protected by the conservation easement in public land. And so the public doesn't always get to access that land. Oftentimes landowners are very generous, however, and do share their land either through an enterprising use, whether it's farm tours or another sort of public accommodation use. And then sometimes there are instances where public access is the upshot of the easement. But in every case, the landowner, for the love of his or her land and out of a desire to make a contribution to the people of Virginia, is promising to protect these identified public values in his or her private land. And so the role of the Virginia Outdoors Foundation is to be the custodian, is to be the trustees of those protections.
And I'd like to just add, if I may, that it's in perpetuity. So the land trust role is to ensure that those terms within the conservation easement are upheld forever, that it can't be subdivided, that no more houses that are permitted within the easement could be built, that there are no violations within the riparian or that could impair water quality, etc. And so it really is the land trust role. For our organization, we monitor our easements every year. I think VOF, you all monitor them very frequently as well. And so we're out there every year, year after year, forever.
Right. Thank you. And I'll ask you both this question. Parker, we'll start with you. And what's the difference? You both work in land trusts and hold conservation easements. What's the difference in working with private land trusts like Capital Region Land Conservancy and VOF?
I think the biggest is that we focus our resources on our region, right? We're not a statewide organization, and therefore we can do a lot more time and attention to all of the many properties that are interested in being placed under an easement in the Richmond area. Whereas VOF as a state organization, you know, they're looking at properties that are as far as Lee County all the way up to Northumberland County, and they have that responsibility, and to also be stewards in perpetuity for those properties. You know, they just simply require a lot more resources, whereas we would apply ours locally.
Brett, do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's right. That's the main distinguisher. Both of our organizations are established to help create these partnerships for historic resource, open space, recreational, natural, scientific, and scenic areas. So on a substantive basis, our mission is very, very symmetrical. The main difference being that our territories are identified. Ours are established as statewide, as Parker impressed us with his geography, with his knowledge of the farthest western county in Virginia all the way to the eastern.
Right.
We cover all of those and everything in between. And it works very well because, as Parker said, they can focus their time and attention on this region. So, and these programs are very popular. They're generally oversubscribed. So they're really.
And I think it's also important. I was just going to say, I think it's also very important to recognize that it is a collaborative relationship between land trusts, whereas we focus locally. Oftentimes we'll find a landowner that we're working with that we really think would be better suited if the Virginia Outdoors Foundation were to hold that conservation easement. You know, sometimes we see those relationships and those partnerships to be better suited for the landowner or for the land. I will say historically, we have easements that we co-hold with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation from some of our early days when we were not as well advanced in the holding of easements. And so that was a great partnership. And I think VOF has served that role throughout the state in terms of nurturing and fostering land trusts.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the next question, I think it's important to note the last several years, there have been significant pushes toward urban conservation. And I know you both organizations do quite a bit of work in urban areas throughout the state. And what is the role of a conservation easement within an urban area? Brett, you want to start with that? Or Parker, go ahead.
Brett. So for our easements, we hold an easement on land as small as 3/4 of an acre. In that instance, what we were protecting was a bit more of a buffer to other natural areas. The natural environment within an urban setting is constantly threatened by encroachment. And so anytime you can create buffer, there's opportunity. But what we also are really focused on more recently is trying to address equity. In the city of Richmond, when you look at our communities, there is not equal access to parks and open space. There's really a deficiency in South Richmond for portions of the city that were annexed from Chesterfield County back in 1970. And that area just never got the built infrastructure. And it is predominantly minority populations, predominantly populations living at or below the poverty level. And we see it as our role to make sure that we're increasing the access to open space because of its healing components, because of the air quality, water quality. At the same time, we're looking at urban agriculture opportunities, knowing that we have a significant number of areas and communities that have low food access. How can we support a more resilient food supply for those communities, and working with whether it's the Agrarian Trust or others to do that. We're very happy with the progress that we're making. For example, we will add another 13-acre park later this year, and we're constantly looking at new opportunities that really provide the 10-minute walk model that the Trust for Public Land had created for that equity. Lastly, and then I'll hand this over to Brett for her responses, but I will say the other thing is green infrastructure. For a city like Richmond, where we have old infrastructure, old gray infrastructure, primarily related to our stormwater systems, anytime that we have an opportunity to provide green infrastructure, it can be done at a significantly lesser cost, and it's using natural areas to produce the same benefits that gray infrastructure can also provide in terms of stormwater runoff and maintaining the health of our James River and our drinking supply.
Thank you. Brett?
As Parker mentioned, oftentimes when you're working in an urban or suburban context, you're dealing with threats of development. And as he mentioned, open space resources are finite generally within urban jurisdictions. We're not growing any more land, and so they're very, very precious resources that are under constant threats of development. Also, working in creating compatible use, land use patterns, as Parker mentioned, buffering natural areas. And also working on connectivity. So it's really just another tool in the land use toolkit. And what's novel about it is that it's just that it's been practiced most in the rural areas because that's where you have the large assemblages of land. But the needs are the same. The needs for clean air, clean water, stormwater, green infrastructure to handle that. All of those things are can be achieved in the city. And so we have just taken our knowledge, skills, and ability and worked with the localities to figure out how we can help them best address their needs. But so in the case of Evergreen, a 60-acre memorial park in the city of Richmond, you may say, well, why would a cemetery need a conservation easement? And I would point to all of the infrastructure, a lot of it gray infrastructure around it that threatens it. I-64, Gillies, there's a recycling center there, some additional infrastructure across East Richmond Road. So there is, this is an island, a green island in the city, and there's actually no formal legal protection that cemetery, once established, always remain a cemetery. There are many cases in the annals of land use history where cemeteries, especially Black cemeteries, have been readapted for metro stations, for other public uses. So there's protection for the individuals that are interred there, that they can be reinterred elsewhere. But actually the property itself does not enjoy any more protection than what's afforded for the individual. So it was very important for us to, through a conservation easement, say that this is an important space. It has amazing historical resources there in terms of the biographies that are recorded of the individuals that are buried there. And it's given it the recognition that it deserves. And now we're in the process of reclaiming that space so that it can be not only an educational resource for the city of Richmond and beyond, but also a memorial park, as it was intended, a place for pacification, a green space island there. So it's you can achieve a lot in terms of using a conservation easement for the protection, the investment, and the reclamation of spaces in urban areas. So that's just one example.
Great, thank you. And I will add this one last question, and we can start with Parker. What do you hope to see for the future of conservation easements in Virginia? It's been a wonderful tool, and how it works and the future of your respective organizations.
Great. Well, I think one of the most important is trying to protect what limited natural areas we still have, right? That threat of development, particularly in Richmond today, when we are a growing city, when the development threat is higher than it has been, protect what remaining natural areas we might have. That includes expanding the James River Park system in the acreage that is under that easement that we co-hold with the Enrichmond, as well as the Department of Conservation and Recreation. You know, adding an additional 180 acres into that easement is a pretty big accomplishment that will happen later this year and early next year. But looking at other areas, as Brett said, with connectivity, there are natural areas that are identified in the Richmond 300 plan that are for a greenways and trails system. How can we begin to connect that for our particular work? We know what the city already owns. How do we work with the private sector on either acquiring lands that need to fill in those master plans, or at least getting easements across those lands to fulfill those master plans? So that's very important. And then I had also mentioned working on some green infrastructure. There are new financing tools that are available that we are very interested in better assessing, and whether or not the city and our organization could and should tap into those new financing tools to accelerate the pace at which we are protecting the lands in the Richmond area. And then finally, addressing the food insecurities and trying to create a more resilient food supply for our residents. And I think that's an area that land conservation has not yet fully tapped into in an urban setting, but we have seen several urban farms fail largely due to the ownership issues of the land. If they have a short-term lease, they can't survive through that, and they would be making all sorts of capital improvements on something that could simply be pulled out from underneath of them. So we want to make sure that we're supporting as many of our stakeholders as we can in that regard. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Brett?
We're always looking for ways to make sure that our work is real, relevant, and enjoyable for the citizens of the Commonwealth. And so part of the importance of doing work in our densely populated areas is to make sure that those communities understand that conservation of rural lands contributes to the quality of their life through clean air, through food and fiber that's produced on those properties, through clean water, and then also through getting outdoors. So we're always trying to make sure that our work is serving those needs and looking with an eye towards cultivating a deep conservation ethic in the next generation of Virginia citizens and young conservationists. So having these projects in cities and towns where people can get out there and really touch and feel and enjoy the project is so very important to make sure that, as Parker mentioned, our work is intended to be perpetual, that it is in fact perpetual for the duration. So that's what I am looking to do in my position at the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, is looking to the next generation of conservationists and making sure that they understand the vitality, and they understand why these programs are vital to what constitutes the good life.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, and also appreciate all the hard work you're doing for Virginia on the conservation front. So keep it up.
Thank you, T. Thank you,
All right,
Parker.
thanks.
Thank you, Brett. Great to see everyone.